Hello and welcome back to Westferry Times for another deep dive. I'm Emily.
And hello from me.
Today we're getting into something huge, the rise of the gig economy right here in the UK.
Yeah, it's a topic that really affects how so many people work now.
It really does. It's changing how millions find work, how they build their lives. So the big questions we want to explore are, what does being a gig worker actually mean today? Is it all about freedom? Or is there maybe a hidden cost, like financial insecurity?
That's exactly the balance we need to unpack.
And guiding us through this complex picture, we're joined by Daniel Evans. Daniel's a leading labor market analyst, researcher, and also the author of the book Flexible Futures. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with the basics. When we say gig economy, I think, Uber, Deliveroo, they often spring to mind first. But could you maybe give us a clear picture of what it really covers in the UK now?
Sure. Fundamentally, the gig economy describes this shift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Away from traditional permanent jobs towards, well, shorter-term contracts or freelance work.
Okay.
And these gigs could be anything. Delivering food, yes, but also writing code, walking dogs, providing consultancy. They're often, though not always, connected through digital platforms, those apps that link workers with tasks.
So it's much wider than just those typical delivery or taxi examples. It cuts across professional sectors, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a key point. We're
Yeah.
seeing really significant growth in gig work in areas like law, journalism, marketing, tech, you name it.
Right.
And these digital platforms, they've definitely poured fuel on the fire, making it easier for businesses to find flexible workers and, well, for individuals to offer their skills in different ways.
It really feels like it's everywhere now. Do we have a sense of the scale? Like how many people in the UK are actually doing this kind of work?
We do. The latest figures from the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, suggest that as of 2024, it's around 4.4 million people.
Wow, 4.4 million.
Yeah, engaged in some kind of gig or platform work. If you think about it, that's nearly 1 in 7 workers in the UK.
1 in 7. That's huge. It really shows a massive shift in the workforce.
It really does.
And is this mostly a London thing? Or is it spreading out across the country?
Well, London definitely has a large share, no doubt.
Yeah.
But we're seeing strong growth in other big cities too, Manchester,
Yeah.
Birmingham, Bristol.
Okay.
And interestingly, it's also growing in more rural areas as well, partly because, remote work is becoming more feasible through these same digital platforms. So location isn't always the barrier it once was.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's dig into the why. What's the appeal? Why are so many people drawn to this way of working?
Well, for a lot of people, the big draw is definitely the freedom and flexibility it seems to offer.
Right, the control aspect.
Exactly. Choosing your own hours, maybe working from home, that feeling of being your own boss. Think about maybe a single parent who needs to fit work around childcare. Freelancing can seem ideal.
Or a student, maybe.
Or a student working around lectures. Precisely. For some, that flexibility isn't just nice to have, it's almost like a lifeline, allowing them to participate in the workforce when a traditional 9 to 5 might not work.
Yeah, I can see that. That flexibility is key.
And there's another angle too, income diversification.
Hmm.
Some people use gig work as a side hustle,
Right? Alongside a main job.
Yeah, to supplement their main income.
Yeah.
You can add a bit of financial cushion, or maybe let them explore something they're passionate about without quitting their day job.
Okay, so that covers the appeal, the freedom, the flexibility, maybe topping up income. But we also hear a lot about the downsides. What are the big challenges people face in the gig economy?
Yeah, there's definitely a flip side. I mean, probably the biggest one is income instability.
Right.
Your earnings can swing wildly from one week to the next, makes budgeting, planning for the future, well, pretty difficult. And crucially, many gig workers don't get the traditional rights that most employees take for granted. We're talking sick pay, holiday pay, pension contributions. That kind of safety net just often isn't there.
And that must create a lot of underlying anxiety, I imagine, that lack of security when you're trying to plan ahead, maybe get a mortgage, things like that.
Absolutely. It creates significant precarity for many. And then there's this other layer, what analysts often call algorithmic control.
Algorithmic control, what does that mean in practice?
Well, it means many workers, especially on platforms, are essentially managed by software. Algorithms allocate tasks, monitor performance through customer ratings or GPS tracking,
Okay.
and can even automatically penalize workers, like suspending their account, often with very little transparency or any real way to appeal to a human being.
So this idea of being your own boss, it can kind of clash with being constantly watched and directed by an app.
That's the paradox, exactly. You have theoretical autonomy, but in
Ugh.
practice, you might face intense surveillance and feel quite insecure. It's a real tension.
Yeah, that sounds tricky. You've spoken to people working like this firsthand, haven't you? Can you share some of those stories just to make it more real for us?
Yes, definitely. I remember speaking with a 54-year-old courier up in Liverpool. He was regularly clocking, well, over 70 hours a week just to make ends meet.
70 hours, wow.
Yeah. And while he did value setting his own schedule, the fact that there was zero provision for sick days or even just proper breaks sometimes was a constant source of stress for him.
I bet.
Then there was Chloe, a freelance copywriter down in Brighton. She'd actually found gig work quite liberating after being made redundant from an office job. Gave her independence.
Okay, so a positive experience there.
In many ways, yes.
Right.
But she also talked quite openly about missing the social side of work, the team chats, the shared coffee breaks, that sense of belonging to something.
Right, the community aspect of a traditional workplace, it really shows, doesn't it, how varied the experience is. It's so personal.
It absolutely is. There's no single story that fits everyone.
So, given these complexities, what's the government doing? Is there much happening in the UK to address these challenges to ensure fair treatment for gig workers?
Well, there's been movement, but perhaps slower than some would like. The Taylor Review back in 2017 made quite a few recommendations, things like clarifying employment status, improving rights.
Right, I remember that.
But actually getting those recommendations fully implemented has been, well, a bit slow.
Yeah.
We have seen some really important tribunal rulings recently, though,
Oh, like what?
particularly for drivers for platforms like Uber. Courts have ruled they should be treated as workers, which means they are entitled to things like the minimum wage and holiday pay. So those legal challenges are definitely pushing things forward.
And what about trade unions? Are they getting involved in this space? It seems like it would be hard to organize people working so independently.
It is challenging, definitely. But unions like the IWGB, the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain, and the GMB are actually doing a lot of work here. They're actively organizing gig workers, and they've been behind some of those key legal victories. But you're right, the scattered digital nature of the work makes traditional organizing methods difficult.
Right.
They're having to find new ways to build collective power.
It's an evolving landscape for them too, then. How does the UK stack up internationally? Are other countries grappling with this in similar ways, or are there different approaches?
It's interesting to compare. The UK is probably somewhere in the middle, globally speaking.
Okay.
You've got countries like Spain, for example, or the Netherlands, which have brought in stronger legal protections. Spain actually reclassified many delivery riders as employees, which was a big step.
Right.
Then you look at somewhere like the U.S., where the gig economy is absolutely massive, but the rules are really inconsistent. They vary hugely from state to state.
So no single perfect model has emerged yet.
Not really. Everyone's kind of figuring it out, and I think the UK is definitely watching what happens elsewhere. It's a very active area of policy debate worldwide.
Let's shift focus slightly, maybe to the more personal impact. How does this kind of work affect people's mental well-being?
That's a really crucial question. And again, it's often a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, on one hand, that autonomy and flexibility can be really empowering. It can boost creativity, give people a sense of control, which is good for well-being.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, the income worries, the lack of support structures you'd get in a traditional job, sometimes feeling isolated or even exploited, that can really take a toll mentally.
Yeah.
Things like not having a clear routine or regular feedback can also add to stress and, potential burnout for some people.
It sounds like you almost need a certain kind of, I don't know, emotional resilience to really thrive in that uncertain environment.
That's a very good way of putting it. I
Yeah.
think that's probably true for many.
So looking into your crystal ball, what's next? Where do you see the gig economy heading in the UK over the next few years?
Well, crystal ball gazing is always tricky, isn't it? But I think we're likely to see more attempts to create sort of hybrid models,
Hybrid models, meaning
ways to combine the flexibility that people value about gig work, but with a baseline of essential worker rights and protections, finding that middle ground.
Okay, so maybe more security built in?
Potentially.
Mm-hmm.
I think increased regulation is almost certain as policymakers continue to wrestle with the fallout. We might also see, interestingly, the rise of new types of platforms.
Oh,
Platforms perhaps focused more on ethical freelancing, maybe even cooperative ownership models, Sort of like a fair B&B, but for work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like a more worker-centric approach.
Possibly. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, artificial intelligence.
Oh, AI.
AI will undoubtedly disrupt things further. It might automate some existing gig tasks out of existence, but it will probably also create new kinds of digitally mediated work we haven't even thought of yet. So constant change is probably the only guarantee.
It certainly sounds like it. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for breaking down such a complex topic for us.
It's been my pleasure. Glad I could help shed some light.
And to everyone listening, whether you're working in the gig economy yourself, thinking about it, or just curious about how our working lives are changing, we really hope this deep dive gave you some valuable food for thought.
Yeah, hopefully useful.
Thank you for tuning in to Westferry Times. Please do hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss our future deep dives. Stay informed, stay curious, and goodbye for now.